This is it. This is the finale of Battlebots Season 5. And this is the finale of my previews and predictions. We've finally made it here. Let's just have a quick look back at the round of 16. We had upsets galore, everyone's bracket was busted, and no one got them all right, I'm pretty sure. Ribbot was trashed by Uppercut but managed to survive. Tantrum proved that it can handle just about any horizontal spinner as it took out the number 2 seed's Bloodsport. Sawblaze got revenge for its quarterfinal loss last season by taking out Witch Doctor. Mammoth challenged Shatter, and Adam Wrigley only just scraped through that with a judge's decision. The Brazilians took out the king of kinetic energy by defeating Tombstone. Valkyrie did not manage to snatch revenge from Whiplash as the Vasquez family continues to progress. Endgame is finally performing the way I think we all expected it to back in Season 3 and 4, removing Rotator from the competition. And despite Gigabyte's newfound durability, Hydra, the top seeds, continue to flip their way into favoritism for the Giant Nut. So at the end of this episode, we'll find out who will take it, who will join Tombstone and Bite Force as holders of the Giant Nut. Let's try and figure out who it's going to be. Let's dive straight in with Hydra versus Whiplash. Hydra, the number 1 seeds, they are having a dream season thus far. They are so far undefeated, just coming off a victory against a resurgent Gigabyte, and they've really shown us that flippers are not out of the meta just yet. Whiplash is having a very similar season as it had the past 2 years. They have once again made it to the quarterfinals, a milestone that they have not missed out on since the Splatter days. The past couple of fights have been a run of deja vu for them as they have re-defeated Huge and Valkyrie to get this far. Despite their experience and competence at the controls, they come into this as the 8th seeds and underdogs against this season's main Ewart clan bot. This is interestingly the 3rd time these two teams have fought. Back in Season 2, we saw Splatter get knocked out by Warrior Dragon, and then in Season 4, the Vasquez family got their revenge by defeating Son of Waiachi. One of the fights that had cemented Whiplash's stardom back in Season 3 was their quarterfinal victory against Bronco, the marquee flipper of the past, until Hydra surpassed them. This was a shock victory for Whiplash as Bronco was still in its top form, but Matt Vasquez was able to exploit the long and cumbersome turning circle of the flipper bot. Bronco was only able to get 1 flip on Whiplash that battle, and spent the rest of the time being absolutely smothered by Matt Vasquez's driving. The difference with Hydra, however, is that not many robots are able to get underneath Hydra particularly frequently. Even if Matt Vasquez is able to expose Hydra's longer shape and get around to the side easily, it's going to be a bit of a toss-up as to whether or not Matt Vasquez can get that wedge underneath Hydra's skirts and start to take control of the fight. And that's not accounting for the fact that Hydra is honestly more agile than Bronco was back then. It's probably going to be a lot more difficult for Whiplash to actually get around to the sides. We all know what's going to happen to Whiplash if Hydra is actually able to get underneath it. The difference I think between Whiplash and other robots that Hydra has fought is that Whiplash will have a much faster recovery time. It can self-right very quickly, and once it's back on its wheels, Matt is going to be able to reorientate himself to get back on the attack almost immediately. Back in episode 10, we saw Uppercut struggle to get underneath Hydra with those forks at the front, and both Witch Doctor and Hypershock, when faced with Hydra, neither of them decided to go with wedges and try and win the ground game against Jake Ewart. They wanted their vertical discs to have as much exposure as possible. So if Whiplash was to go that route, they would probably use the same setup as they did against Sawblaze, but I don't think that's a tenable strategy for Matt Vasquez to go with, given Whiplash's strengths. Matt Vasquez has said that they've got a couple of options in store for Hydra, so I'm looking forward to seeing what they actually end up with.
We do have a couple plans for Hydra. We kind of have like a safe route and then like a little bit risky competitive route. We'll see which we go.
But assuming they're still driving Whiplash with the same basic principles as usual, the ground game is super important, and no one has been getting underneath Hydra this entire season. Out of these 4 quarterfinal matches, I think this one is probably the most difficult to predict. I absolutely do see Matt Vasquez outdriving Jake, but I just don't think he can smother Hydra the same way he was able to smother Bronco. Hydra will get more flips on Whiplash, and that will allow it to take control of the fight. In the end, I think the amount of flips that Hydra will be able to get on Whiplash and the impact that they have on the fight will impress the judges more. So I'm going to go Hydra by judge's decision. This would end yet another good run for Whiplash this season. It's hard not to be consistently impressed by them, but you just got to start to wonder, what do they need to do to take that next step? And that is a step that Hydra is taking already, even with this just being their 2nd season in the competition. They will move through to the semi-finals and await the winner of Black Dragon and Ribbot. Let's move across to the 7-18 matchup. This is Sawblaze versus Tantrum. Jamison Go has made it here for the 2nd year in a row. Last time they were here, they fought against Witch Doctor. They have just beaten Witch Doctor in the round of 16. And right now, they're going up against a different take on the fast, agile, four-wheeled vertical spinner. That robot is Tantrum. It was built by Iron Hill, and this season, it's having an absolute blinder. They're just coming off a victory against the second seed's Bloodsport, one of the many upsets that happened last episode. Tantrum has proven that it's stiff opposition for horizontal spinners to come up against. Their fights against Bloodsport, Fusion, and Valkyrie all showing that. But coming up against other types of weapons, it hasn't really been tested. And coming up against a robot with a hammer saw, well, Iron Hill said it himself in their latest post-match debrief.
Early in the event, during one of the interviews, they asked, who do you not want to face? My immediate response to that was Sawblaze. The main logic is we got pantsed by Scorpios last year.
The victory over Witch Doctor can really show you exactly why Iron Hill is worried. While I don't think Witch Doctor has the same amount of magnets that Tantrum does, providing the downforce that has been part of Tantrum's success this season, it is a similar shape, and it has similar weak points to what Tantrum has around the sides in terms of ground clearance. And especially now this season, Jamison Go has improved Sawblaze's center of mass, to which the Forks will rarely leave the ground. It is now even more capable of getting underneath their opponents from most angles. Tantrum plans to layer some armor on top of their robot to protect the more sensitive areas of their robot. Their armor hasn't been breached yet this season, yet they haven't come up against any overhead attacking weapons. Tantrum has done a good job at getting underneath robots this season, but it hasn't come up against anyone that was particularly important against. Not many of their fights were won based on the ground game. This is one that's going to be imperative in, and I'm not sure if that Forks can quite do it. The way I see it is that if Sawblaze can beat Witch Doctor, it can probably beat Tantrum. Witch Doctor did take control in some parts of that fight, and due to the weight and power of their weapon, they were able to make the most of that. Tantrum, on the other hand, I don't quite have faith in that weapon to do the same amount of damage that Witch Doctor was able to. So even if there are portions of the fight that Tantrum is able to take control of, I don't know if they're going to be able to make the most of them, especially given how controlling Sawblaze can be and how much of the fight I expect them to be in the ascendancy. The other vulnerability for Tantrum is their weapon itself. I don't know how it's going to stand up if Jamison decides to go weapon to weapon. They beat Witch Doctor in the weapon to weapon exchanges, and Tantrum's weapon has shown vulnerability across the season, especially the carriage mechanism. We've also already seen Tantrum lose to Scorpios, another hammer saw robot. Indeed, this is an updated, much better version of Tantrum, but it's easy to see exactly why Iron Hill is worried about Sawblaze, given his experience with Scorpios in the past. So yeah, I'm going to go Sawblaze. I think it's going to be a judge's decision. I still have faith in Tantrum to fight this one out to the very end, but on control and damage especially, I expect Sawblaze to take this, and to take them through to the semi-finals for the first time. It is such a quality machine. This seems to be the year that Jamison Go is going to cement his legacy. I'm not sure about it winning the Giant Nut just yet, but at least reaching the top 4 is significant enough in and of itself. Tantrum, on the other hand, has had a fantastic year. It's no doubt earned a whole heap of respect from the community, from the builders, from everyone, and it's one that's just about come from nowhere. It's definitely one of the best stories of Battlebots 2020. So now let's have a look at the lowest seed left in the competition, the number 20 seed Ribbot, and their fight against the 5th seed's Black Dragon. Ribbot is just coming off a shock victory against Uppercut, one of the greatest comebacks we've seen in Battlebots. Uppercut's drive completely shut down, while, 2/3 of Ribbot was still working, despite the immense beating that they took. And I keep saying it, this is a tough robot. But having said that, here's a robot that has never been knocked out in Battlebots yet. The Brazilians with Black Dragon are similarly unknockoutable, and they proved that once again with their victory over Tombstone in their round of 16 matchup. That fight wasn't as much of a shock as some of the others that episode, however it really was a statement victory by the Brazilians, taking out the former champions and going at least one step further than they did last season. This is actually a fight that I keep going back and forth on. I'm not as bullish on Black Dragon's chances as I thought I would be. The more I think about it, the more I give Ribbot a chance at this. Now, the first thing we need to point out is that Ribbot's undercutter weapon was completely destroyed in that fight against Uppercut. They'll definitely be running with the vertical spinner, probably for the rest of the season. Black Dragon has shown that it can struggle against vertical spinners. We've seen them lose to Copperhead and Lockjaw in the past, but they keep running with a flat wedge against them, and for some reason I just don't think they're comfortable going with their smaller wedgelet setup like they did against Minotaur. But maybe now against Ribbot it's time to run with it. Either way, I think Ribbot is pretty good at getting underneath their opponents. Their weapon seems to have good reach, as we can see in their fight against Endgame especially, and also a little bit against Mad Catter. The main worry for Ribbot is definitely Black Dragon being able to get around the sides too easily. It is a well-driven robot. We know how fancy they are with the controls. They might have learnt that it was a mistake to go head-to-head with Copperhead throughout that fight, and take a more cautious approach here against Ribbot. because David Jin and his team has proven that that weapon is very powerful. Black Dragon, being as maneuverable as it is definitely capable of getting round to the sides of Ribbot and removing a couple of those tires, which has been a weak point for them in the past. I am kind of making this decision on the fly, but thinking about it, Ribbot just doesn't have the speed, I think, to counter that of Black Dragon. And that's the main thing for me. As I've kept saying, I'm not that impressed by Black Dragon's weapon this season, although it's obviously going to be capable of ripping off Ribbot's tires. I think the main factor to me in this fight will be control. I reckon it will go to the judges, because as we've seen, Ribbot is an incredibly tough robot. It's not going to stop moving just because it's been smashed into the wall a couple of times. But yeah, that's it for me. While I think Ribbot does have a chance, it's gotta come down to the control that Black Dragon can exert onto the match. So the Brazilians move through and move closer to going one step further than their fellow countrymen in the Minotaur team and taking that giant nut. A fight against either Whiplash or Hydra would be fascinating. What a driving match that would be. Ribbot, on the other hand, the boys from WPI, how good has this season been for them? No one saw Ribbot coming this far. It's not a robot that you look at the start of the season and say, yes, that is a top 8 bot, but here it is. It would be great to see either one of Tantrum or Ribbot make it past this point, because they are absolute underdogs. However, I'm just not quite seeing it against such quality. Alright, and now we move on to the last of the quarterfinals. This is New Zealand versus New York, or in other words, Endgame versus Shatter. Both of these teams are having their best seasons yet. Endgame has just beaten Victor, Soto, and Rotator, but it has to be noted that apart from Hypershock, Shatter will be the first robot without a horizontal spinner that Endgame has faced this season. Shatter similarly has mainly fought spinners as well, with Mammoth being their first championship fight against a control bot. Mammoth, the big awkward climbing frame that it is, provided a very difficult challenge for Shatter to get its head around, both its thinking head and its hammerhead, but Adam Wrigley scraped by on a judge's decision. Bots FC have consistently come up with plans and executed them flawlessly during this season. However, the fight against Mammoth definitely bamboozled them. Endgame is obviously a high quality machine, however, it is a fairly standard design, therefore I think would make it fairly easy to plan for. Vertical spinners are common. Shatter had a plan for their fight against Lockjaw, so it would stand to reason that they've got a plan here against Endgame. And according to Adam Wrigley, that plan will involve the same front forks that we saw against Lockjaw, but also a shorter hammerhead, because Endgame's chassis will apparently be pretty easy to miss with their standard one. On the other side of things, as seen in this photo, Endgame is going in with extra top armor and the forks at the front there, and a fresh blade as well, since look at what happened to the last one against Rotator. It's going to be interesting to see which forks beat which in the competition to keep the others at bay. Whichever way it goes, Endgame does have the clear advantage in terms of weapon power. We've seen that weapon churn through robots like they're nothing thus far in this competition. And while Shatter is durable, it's certainly not invulnerable to being flipped up by vertical spinners. The ablative armor makes it harder for a vertical spinner to catch Shatter in any significant way, but Endgame could catch onto the forks or even the hammer if they swing it errantly at the vertical spinner. Endgame being able to consistently throw Shatter in the air is definitely worst game scenario for Adam Wrigley, and the more the ablative armor gets damaged, the more and more that becomes likely to happen. Shatter is obviously going to be able to challenge Endgame here. It made it this far for a reason. They're probably going to aim that hammer right at Endgame's weapon the same way they did against Malice to potentially try and break the belts or something along those lines. I don't know if that's going to happen though. I think Endgame is much more likely to win a weapon-on-weapon battle. So in the end, I don't see what strategy Shatter can take that will ensure them victory. They need to hope that those forks can always get underneath Endgame so they can take control of the fight and start scoring aggression points with that hammer. I'm not sure how much damage that hammer will do against the newly implemented top armor for Endgame. In the end, I just think the amount of damage that Endgame is able to output will be too much for Shatter. I'm going to go Endgame, and I think it's going to be by knockout. Even though Shatter doesn't get knocked out often, I think Endgame will be able to manage it. It's been a stellar year for them so far. I don't think it's going to quite end yet, and the New Zealanders will march on to the semi-finals. Meanwhile for Shatter, this has been a year where they have shown that they are the primary hammer bot in the competition. This season it was between them and Beta. Blacksmith will come back next season hopefully, but with the way that Shatter's been performing, I don't see them losing that crown anytime soon. Alright, now we've made it to the semi-finals, and we're only talking about hypothetical battles from here on in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do this all in one section. And the main reason for that is that I just don't really want to be talking extensively about battles that may never happen. So let's start on the left, and we've got Hydra or Whiplash going against Ribbot or Black Dragon. I've tipped Hydra versus Black Dragon, so it's going to be Battle of the Beasts in that first semi-final, I think, in most likelihood. However, I can definitely see both Whiplash and Ribbot getting through. I honestly have to say that if Hydra beats Whiplash, I don't see them losing to either Ribbot or Black Dragon. Definitely not Ribbot. That would be the end of the Frog's chances completely. It has way too much ground clearance around the robot. It's not going to be fast enough to dodge Hydra's attacks. That would be the end of the 20 Siege run there. If it's Black Dragon versus Hydra, as I'm expecting, it's going to be a little bit more difficult for Hydra, but we've consistently seen robots struggle to get underneath Hydra throughout the season, and Black Dragon just isn't the best robot for getting underneath other opponents. I can see Black Dragon getting round to the sides of Hydra, yes, but riding up them and not being able to launch any meaningful attacks. Hydra seems more durable this season. However, the main thing about them is less that they can take a hit, but more that they just don't get hit. And that is a feature of such a low and well-driven robot. So I don't think the few attacks that Black Dragon will be able to get on Hydra will be impactful enough. So let's see if the Vasquez family beat Hydra. Again, I don't see Ribbot beating them. Whiplash is going to be too maneuverable. Ribbot is just a little too slow still. I think it's a little bit faster than last season, but it definitely struggles to put some pace out there in the battle box. Black Dragon's kind of the opposite. A Black Dragon versus Whiplash fight would be completely fascinating. What a driving fight that would be. I think in practice, Matt Vasquez is definitely the better driver. They hype him up a lot on the show, but I think that's completely deserved. And again, it's a situation where Black Dragon's opponents will probably be able to get underneath them pretty easily. But in the end, I think it's going to be Hydra versus Black Dragon, as I've said, so I reckon Hydra will move on to the final. So let's move on to the right, and we've got Tantrum or Sawblaze going against Shatter or Endgame. These are the two fights that I'm much more certain about. I'm much more certain that Endgame and Sawblaze will fight it out there, and that is, interestingly enough, going to be a rematch from a Season 3 main event. Not a fight night battle, but a USA versus the World battle. Both robots were very different back in Season 3, and it was an incredibly close fight, where Sawblaze just eked out a victory when Endgame seemed to lose most of its drive for the last half of the battle. A more well-designed and more well-built Sawblaze would come up against a more reliable endgame here. Sawblaze's defeat of Witch Doctor is obviously significant when you're judging the chances of it going up against vertical spinners. However, I think endgame hits harder than Witch Doctor. And while it's not as well driven, maybe that doesn't matter, since I reckon Sawblaze is just going to win the driving fight anyway. The point when fighting Sawblaze, just like Uppercut showed us, is just to do a bunch of damage. And what Uppercut also showed us is that Sawblaze isn't as durable as it looks when you really get a hold of it. I honestly think endgame is on some great form, and it would beat Sawblaze. I also think Endgame would definitely beat Tantrum. Tantrum, we've seen it struggled a little bit against Atom 94, not much, but we saw what even a subpar vertical spinner could do to it. But if it was Shatter to beat Endgame and they were to go up against Tantrum, the two underdogs, I can honestly see Iron Hill running rings around Shatter, and it would actually be a pretty favourable fight for him. Shatter is a lot faster than it was last season. However, it's nowhere near as fast as Tantrum, who I reckon would be able to take control. And the thing is, if Tantrum is able to survive Sawblaze's overhead attacks, it's going to be able to survive Shatter's as well, I think. And similarly, if Sawblaze was able to best Tantrum and go up against Shatter, I think we'd see Shatter lose control of the fight pretty quickly. Jamison Go is such a good driver. I think this would be a very unfavorable matchup for Shatter. Jamison Go is starting to enjoy going weapon on weapon against his opponents. Shatter would lose that. I'm sure Adam Wrigley's got something to deal with overhead attacks, no doubt. However, I just don't see him gaining control of that fight. Alright, so on to the final, and there are plenty of permutations here, obviously, but I'm fairly confident it comes down to 4 bots: Hydra, Whiplash, Sawblaze, or Endgame. Worst case scenario for Hydra, I reckon, would be a fight against Sawblaze. They are very good at getting underneath their opponents this season, and the overhead attacks against Hydra would be incredibly scary. However, up against Endgame, I reckon Hydra could take control of the fight fairly quickly. Endgame is a lot more durable this season, but I don't think they would be able to survive flying so high as Hydra can flip them. Whiplash versus Sawblaze has already happened this season. I don't see that fight going any differently as it did back in episode 1. It would be really cool for that matchup to bookend the season entirely. However, I think it's a fairly foregone conclusion that Sawblaze would win that again. And similarly, we've seen Whiplash struggle against really powerful vertical spinners such as Bite Force in the past. I don't see them getting past the New Zealand bot to take the giant nut. So, ultimately, this is the way I think it's going to go down. Hydra will defeat Whiplash, Black Dragon to defeat Ribbot, and Sawblaze to see off Tantrum, all of these by judges' decisions, and then we've got Endgame knocking out Shatter. Into the semi-finals, Hydra to defeat Black Dragon by judges' decision, and Endgame to get revenge on Sawblaze by knockout, and then the final, Hydra versus Endgame, I think will be Hydra by knockout. And that's going to be a very interesting result, given how some people think that Hydra made it to the top seed illegitimately with a win against Huge, whatever. Hydra has proven to be an incredibly impressive robot. I always had it labeled as a bit fragile, but then I started realizing it just doesn't get hit, and that is part of the dominance of Hydra, is that it just is difficult to tag. They're top seeds for a reason. They've beaten incredible bots like Uppercut, Witch Doctor, Gigabyte for good reason, and it's going to be amazing to see it how it all shakes out. So that is it. That is Battlebots, that is the previews and predictions for the final. I can't believe I've made it. We've done it. Thank you for sticking with me. It's been such a wonderful ride. There's been so much to talk about this season of Battlebots. I didn't get round to it all, so that's why I'm thinking I'll do a season in review video. It'll probably be quite a long one, so it'll probably be like a couple months away, especially since I just need a break from editing right now. It's been a hell of a lot to deal with, but I'm so glad that I have. I do want to keep this channel active with Battlebots content, but right now I definitely need to step away from it a little bit. But at least I won't have any deadlines. For next season, I don't know if this is the format that I'm going to stick with. I really enjoyed doing it, doing such in-depth analyses and putting so much effort into editing. But the reason that I started putting so much time into it was because this was a COVID hobby, and now I'm finding myself definitely without that time. Season 6, hopefully we don't have a pandemic to deal with, so that means I probably won't have the same amount of time to put into episodes like this week by week. So I don't know if I'll be able to do it. I mean, it's been difficult now. We're getting back to normal life. We haven't had many COVID cases this year at all. There are no restrictions, and I have all sorts of, obligations to my own real life. So as nice as this was to be a COVID hobby, I don't know if I can replicate the same thing in Season 6. But I do like doing videos like this. I do like spending the effort. It's more just sort of the deadlines, having to do it each and every week. So maybe there's going to be something down the line that's not as time sensitive as this, but we'll have to wait and see. Anyway, as I said, thank you so much for commenting, for liking, for subscribing, for the support. It's meant a lot, and it definitely motivates me to come back and keep doing things like this. So I'll catch you guys whenever I catch you.